Hello, I'm Charlie Paradise, and I head up the sustainability practice at Smart Design. On behalf of myself, my co-host Catherine Eisenberg, I'm pleased to welcome you to our virtual Smart Salon on perceptions of sustainability. This salon follows our research on the same topic, which found that well-intentioned people often currently aren't recycling properly. They don't understand what words like compostable mean, and they don't have a framework for evaluating the eco-friendliness of different package types against each other. To discuss this further and find out what we can do about this, we've got three guests who spend a lot of time thinking about these issues. And they are, oops, one second. Kelly, over to you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Kramer, and I work at an environmental nonprofit called Green Blue. And Green Blue has a series of projects to help businesses be more sustainable. So one program that we have is Sustainable Packaging Coalition. But the project that I spend the most time on is how to recycle, a labeling system that I lead. It's the first standardized recyclability labeling system for packaging. So it tells consumers exactly what to do with all of the parts of their package and even when not to recycle it. And it's for the US and Canada. And so the way that it works is companies join the program and then we give them the recycling labels to use on their packaging, but we also help them make more recyclable packaging.
Great, thank you. Carolina.
Hi there. Well, thank you first of all to the Smart Design team for having Cliff Bar on here. My name is Carolina Leonhardt and I am the Sustainability Manager for Cliff Bar & Company. I've been with Cliff for about 4.5 years now, and I manage sustainability initiatives really across the company. And I also more specifically lead our zero waste work, and I sit on a cross-functional team that leads the company's sustainable packaging work. So that's why I'm here today, and I'm excited to share a little bit of the work that we have going on around our commitment to sustainable packaging. In early 2020, we signed on to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation global commitment where we pledged to make 100% of our packaging reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025. And I'm sure many on this call have heard that commitment, but we're taking it very, very seriously. And a cornerstone of this work is that we have our sights set on creating a compostable wrapper for Cliff Bar and for our iconic brand that you see there. And we know that the challenge of plastic waste is really complicated. And when it comes to sustainable packaging, there really is no silver bullet or one size fits all. And we need a broad range of solutions. And we know that compostable packaging is one of those. And when it's used in the right application, compostable packaging provides so many benefits. It helps us reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, can be made with renewable plant-based materials, helps keep food waste out of landfills. There's so many things that I could talk about. And more broadly, it's a truly circular solution that, compostable packaging can turn into compost and improve soil health. So sneak peek, we have a dedicated team of people working on this, running test materials through trials and lab testing to make sure that it meets our standards. And we're expecting to have a test wrapper prototype out later this year for testing. But we recognize that getting a technically compostable wrapper out on market is really only half of the battle. And we really want to make sure that the highest rate of wrappers actually get collected and composted. So I'm excited to talk more about that later today and how we're working to make that happen.
Great, thank you very much. Scott, over to you.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Scott Boylston and I'm calling in from Savannah. I'm the graduate coordinator of design for sustainability at SCAD and have authored a book on sustainable package design called exactly that, Sustainable Package Design, about 10 years back. Really excited to be here, really happy to be a part of this. Charlie and the Smart Design team, I think you've done some great work around that recent report that you've put out on this subject matter. So thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be on call with Carolina and Kelly. So thanks. So our program is not what you might, but just really quickly about the program. It's a graduate program. The reason why I don't want to preface it with this is because it's not what you're call a typical design program. It's not around package design or graphic design or architecture or industrial design. Instead, it's around facilitating the conditions that are necessary for sustainable design to prosper. And I'm happy to follow these two guys up, because our whole ambition is to train young professionals to help Kelly and Carolina out in the great work that they're doing. So we approach it from a systems thinking perspective, sustainability, and a design strategy perspective. And so we're always dealing with different kinds of projects, from social innovation projects with communities here in Savannah and as far away as Nigeria, working with brands to help them develop more sustainable solutions across the board, and working with government agencies as well. And a good example, can't say too much about it because it's an NDA, the project that we worked on with a major sports apparel company that was dealing with a lot of synthetic clothing. And what's interesting about that kind of material is it's perfect to wear, but once it goes into the waste stream, it's considered toxic waste. So there's something to think about there. But in their factories, they have a lot of offcuts, and they asked our team to look at different ways those offcuts could be used. And there's a lot of different projects that came out of it. One of them was a new package design. So the package design was for footwear. It was similar to Puma's clever little bag, but better because it was all waste. And the idea there, I think the takeaways for us is it significantly reduced the toxic waste stream from other products. So that was a big win. It reduced the overall weight of the package by of the package for the shoes by 40% or thereabouts. And it reduced the use of virgin materials by about 60%. And it generated what we call a resource productivity. So the materials, the embodied energy that was required to make the clothing was then used to make the new packaging. So it's kind of like a packaging project that came out of the opportunity. That's just something that I thought might be helpful to share.
Great, well, thank you very much. So I'm going to stop sharing now so we can all see each other, and talk a little bit about one of the findings that we found in our research. And it was a little surprising to us. It was that only 48% of the people we asked knew they were supposed to leave the caps on plastic bottles before recycling. And this despite the work that Kelly's doing in that field with the recycling label and education and so on. And it's a very conventional package. It's a package that's been around for a while. So this kind of poses questions as people are inventing new packages. What are the challenges here? So how can we help consumers dispose of packages in the right way? I mean, Kelly, this is what your world. So maybe we'll start with you. Any thoughts there?
Yes, this is my whole world, because the How to Recycle label is literally the exact answer to help consumers know what to do with their packaging. It's just one piece, it's labeling on packaging. It's not going to solve all of our problems in society with materials and recycling, but it really does empower people. And so the way that the program works is it's a voluntary initiative. And so there's no requirement for companies to join, but brand owners, retailers, even companies within the supply chain can join the program. And then it's really up to them what they decide to label with the How to Recycle label. And that's really important with consumer awareness, because the How to Recycle label is only really as good as the company's implementation of it and how they embrace it. And so, for example, the company might have a goal to make all of their packaging recyclable by a certain date, or they might have a goal to label their packaging for recyclability by a certain date. And so, depending on that company's values and how sophisticated they are with goals, then the more serious they're likely to be with how they implement the label and put it on the packaging. So the companies send us their packaging specifications and we give them a label for it. And then there's a series of guidelines that we have for how they feature that label on package. We don't want to be overly prescriptive or strict about where it needs to be placed on the package, or we don't need to make it really huge, but we do give guidelines for that. And then the companies will then place the label on packaging. So for example, Unilever has a public goal to place the how to recycle label on all of their packaging. So companies should think about their hierarchy of values and what's important to them. And if engaging with consumers on recycling is important, then they could consider joining how to recycle and placing that label on the package.
And when you're talking about labeling hierarchy, like what would be like the gold? What could they do the best to use your labels?
Well, we often hear discussions about real estate on packaging, and oh, there's so many things that we want to communicate to the consumer on packaging. Sometimes there's regulatory information, nutrition panels, but a lot of times there's a lot of marketing language and other things. And so a brand's values can help dictate what they should or want to make room for. So that's what I mean. There's some companies think that if they have to move anything like a centimeter over on their artwork, then it doesn't fit. But then other companies are willing to bend over backwards, like we have the label on some lip balm, like a tiny little chapstick. So it really just depends on how important it is to the brand and what they want to message.
Very cool, thank you. So Caroline, are these the problems that I'm sure you run into currently with Clif Bar, and are going to run into even more as you get into the world of compostables? So before I tell you that, I've just had a reminder. There's a Q&A button at the bottom. If you want to ask questions, please type them at any time. We'll be pausing the pre-prepared questions in about 10 minutes or so, and moving to yours. So if you have questions, please type them there. So Carolina, sorry, back to you. So how are you, what are your thoughts about how you can communicate correct disposal?
Yeah, that's a really, I mean, I think Kelly, hit the nail on the head, and the need for educating consumers and communicating to consumers. It's super important. And I think for Clif Bar, as we're rolling out our compostable packaging, that's going to be a big challenge for us. But I think that's where we're really focusing our efforts. I'd say there are kind of three main areas in terms of communicating to consumers around this. Or opportunities for us. One is educating on PAC, right, and messaging. And I'd say that the How to Recycle label and what the Sustainable Packaging Coalition is doing is incredible. We've been a member for a number of years, and are starting to roll out that label on our packaging, and we'll absolutely continue to include it on new packaging. I'd say consistent messaging across the industry is really key for us, and another reason why we're working with the SPC, and then also the Biodegradable Products Institute, BPI, and other industry groups, because we see it's really important. Consumers are confused. They're getting lots of different messages and lots of different instructions, and so sticking to one labeling system, or having consistent messaging is really going to be key. And so we're leaning heavily into things like that labeling for how to recycle, and then ideally how to compost when it comes to be that time. And then of course, BPI has guidelines on how to properly label products. And so we're making sure that we're following the industry and trying to be consistent in our messaging. And then finally, we're a consumer facing brand. We have a group of really loyal brand followers, and we have an opportunity to communicate to them. So we see that as a great avenue for messaging around compostables when we get there, is to not only speak to how consumers should engage with our product and engage with the packaging, but also raise awareness around compostable packaging as a whole, as well as composting, right, as a solution and a really powerful tool for us. And we want to make sure that we're connecting all the dots for consumers. We're not just putting, a compostable package out there and then going, great, we're done. Really, it's kind of a 360 kind of a systems approach to thinking about all of this. And for consumers, they're the first step. They're the most critical part of this. And if they don't know what to do with that package, we've missed a really important and key step. So yeah, I'd say that those three things, educating on PAC, consistent messaging, and then really just using our brand identity to speak to this and communicate through our channels.
Great, thank you very much. So Scott, you're in a kind of a unique position that you don't have a brand to worry about in particular. What are your have you had any thoughts around getting people to do the right thing?
Right. Yeah. So, this is a lot of our conversations in our classes, and there of course there are a lot of different answers, and try to be quick. Maybe to break it down into two things. And one is if we talk about packaging, we've got to talk about plastic. And if we got to talk about plastic, we have to talk about kind of the challenge that we're confronted with, and the seriousness of that challenge. And so I said two things. One would be they both are kind of mindset oriented, if you would. And the first would be let's say the understanding of the plastic industry, that what they're producing is dangerous and toxic, and must be stewarded. And so there has to become a way of looking at materials that are coming out of production with a sense that these are not safe, these are dangerous, and we must steward them. So I think things like extended producer liabilities would be really good for plastics companies, and to help direct their energy towards literally reinventing the way materials flow through our society. Right? We have everyone knows kind of the linear path. We've got to close the loop, kind of create a circular economy. We need to figure out how to help those who are making it change their mindset to see that there's real value in generating the reverse logistics. So that's one mindset thing, because that hopefully, Charlie, that does answer the question about how you help consumers. That is one way to help them, is to give them the critical path and give them the tools to do it. But the other part of it is truly, when we think about like our mindset around things, you can hold up an apple core. We do this all the time, and hold up like a pen cap, right? And there's my pen cap. I don't have an apple core. But if before the apple core becomes an apple core, while it's still an apple, the core is already destined to a particular place. Before the pen cap comes off the pen, it's already destined to the same place, right? And if you look at an apple core and a pen cap, they're nothing alike. They like literally are nothing alike. Yet in our minds, they're exactly the same thing before we even label it. And that means, and their label is trash, they're garbage. So we have this kind of mindset that if we don't need it now, it is garbage and it must be eliminated, from my view, as quick as possible. And so we have to really, I think, dive into the way we think about the value. The plastic it's horrible now. I'll try to stop, but I do get excited about these things. It's horrible now, but it's an amazing material. I could have this thing for so long and do so many different things with it. It's brilliant. This is human ingenuity that we don't know how to use. And because we don't know how to use it, it is literally destroying the functionality of our ecosystems. So how do we change our perceptions? And these are subconscious, right? This is, all of that happens before anybody actually makes a decision. It's made for them in, the kind of that space of the intuitive mind, the quick thinking mind. So I think design has an opportunity. I love what both Kelly and Carolina said. And I love I think maybe I'll stop because we got a longer conversation, but the idea of brand embracing purpose, and then making sure that they have enough, not to complain about the real estate on the label, but to be proud of it. Like, let's tell a story about this magnificent material and how we can keep it in productive use.
Fantastic, thank you. Lots to think about there. And one thing that I heard from all three of you was that the idea that you can't look at a material in isolation. You can't just look at this thing, whether it is we need to close the loop, we need to see the value in this and have an understanding that a pen lid doesn't just become trash, it can do more. And there's a system in place to put that, whether, as Caroline is saying, we have compostable, but having a compostable wrapper without the systems that take that wrapper, don't do much. And Kelly, it's all about the systems. It's about how do you work across brands. So, I mean, let's think, if we can, about these systems and how people can work across brands and beyond just the thing they're working on today to make that happen. I mean, Caroline, you mentioned working with a couple of groups. Maybe you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you're highlighting systems or systems thinking and approaches to this, because that's the way that we need to think and work on all of our most pressing environmental issues, right? When it comes to climate change, packaging, plastic waste, all of these things require a systematic approach. They're not going to be successful unless we're looking at all parts of the systems and all implications. So I think that's really helpful. For Cliff Bar, we're, as we roll out something like a compostable wrapper, we know that we are going to be engaging and implicating a number of different key stakeholders in this whole process. And so part of what we're doing is we're making sure that we're learning from them and collaborating with them so that this isn't something that we're doing in a silo, but that we understand that as we roll something out like this, how can we communicate and engage with municipalities, with haulers, with composters who deal with that end product, right? Who use that to make, who have a viable business. I think it's something that we're doing, and we're taking a really, kind of organized approach to that. And also part of that is working with industry partners, right? I mentioned before BPI, Sustainable Packaging Coalition. There are others. There are other great groups that are working all on this, and a number of other companies, brands, CPGs like ours that are actually working in collaboration to make sure that that we're doing things like having consistent messaging and communicating to consumers and connecting with all the key stakeholders across kind of our value chain and across where we're going to have our wrapper show up. I'd say that industry collaboration has been really key, and we're always leaning on those partners. And then when we think too from a systems perspective, not only learning and engaging with all the key stakeholders, but also showing up to advocate as a business, right? We have an opportunity to also speak up and support strong policies like what Scott was talking about earlier, EPR and others, to make sure that as a company, we're supporting efforts that will bring composting infrastructure and things like that forward. So we're definitely, kind of moving in that direction and are going to be working on advocacy as well, because that's an important aspect to this. So definitely a lot to talk about, but yeah, there's a lot of work across that entire value chain that we need to think about, and the systems kind of thinking to make sure that something like the packaging that we're rolling out is truly successful.
Great, thank you. And in terms of like an example of a project that was founded by brands coming together, it sounds like How to Recycle, that's where you started, right?
Yes, How to Recycle it's essentially a collaboration success story. It's not an exaggeration. It's one of the rare instances within the concept of circular economy where we have seen adoption at scale and an impact on packaging. So what happened was back in 2008, the brands who were members of Sustainable Packaging Coalition, they got together. So Sustainable Packaging Coalition brings companies together from across the packaging supply chain, and we have events and we do research and things like that. And a group of them came together and said, there is so much greenwashing out there. Our competitors are saying that their packaging is recyclable, and we know that it's not. And beyond that, everyone is using their own cutesy marketing language for recycling. And so one brand says, please recycle me. And the other one says, recycle me into something new. And then other companies might cherry pick certain components of their package that are more recyclable and only message the recyclability of those, like say that the box is recyclable, but the rest of the package isn't. And so they wanted to create a level playing field. And they also knew it takes a lot of research and effort to research recyclability and to create standardization. It's a big thing to do. And so it was a group of 12 companies, pilot companies, who came together to support the initiative. And it went through a few years of R&D and working groups and consumer testing and consultation with stakeholders like the Federal Trade Commission. And then it launched in 2012. And since then has had very organic growth, but very rapid growth in the last few years. We've grown over 45% year over year, the last few. And so I think peer pressure is having a really big impact on the movement. And there's also a lot more scrutiny on packaging in the last couple of years by the general public and in the media. And so companies are realizing how important it is to be transparent. So just the other day, a dairy company told us, we feel like we don't even have a choice to join How to Recycle because our competitors are using it. So we're issuing labels for over 225 products per day. So it's happening, and there's a lot more hard work to do. There's a lot of packages that still don't feature the label. There's a lot of packaging design changes that need to happen. I could speak more to that later. And there's also huge systems issues that need addressing, but it is a successful slice of the pie for collaboration.
Oh, thank you. I mean, Scott, how does academia play into this? Do you talked earlier about working with a footwear brand? You know, how are you, or if you are supporting brands in their sustainability initiatives?
Right. Good question. And we there's something, it's called SCAD Pro, and it's basically a partnership program with the university and companies, and they work across. It's not just sustainability; they work across every single discipline. But some of the work that we've done has it really runs the gamut, as you mentioned. The one project I've mentioned, but then we also had from a major beer importer, them grappling with their glass, and because the recycling market for glass just kind of bottomed out the last few years, and they were looking at asking the question, how might this material be beneficial to resilient cities? And so we sit down and write the brief with them. And then we bring students from actually different disciplines who have specific skills within that particular arena. So urban design would be, different disciplines associated with that, as well as sustainability. We've done other things with like Rockefeller Foundation and an organization called Big Zero Global, and that was around, interestingly enough, a very different world, post-harvest loss in northern Nigeria. I hope this one makes sense. It is packaging. They're losing 40% of the tomatoes from the point at which they pick it to the point it gets to the market, and so the focus was on the baskets, right? So very physical, like this is the package, this is the problem. But what we discovered with some work on ground with the team in northern Nigeria was that it was really the stakeholders, the interconnection, the conversations that were occurring. They had a very fragile fruit and not a lot of trust that all of them would get to where they had to go. So rather than reinventing the basket, which would have had unintended repercussions on basket weavers, we kind of created a facilitation between different stakeholders so that they found intermediate value of the tomatoes at different points along that path. And so we created new businesses along the way by kind of helping them see the opportunity as tomatoes started to grade. So it does vary, but we do have the opportunity to work with industry. And like I said, we kind of co-write the brief. So it could be around consumer perceptions. There's another skincare company where it was all about perception. We're trying to change the package, lightweight the package, and what we did. It's a long story, but what we're looking at is how you can take the moisture out of the product first. And then the question is, well, if it's a product that doesn't have the moisture that's intended to be used when you get it home, how might you engage the consumer in actually making the product? And of course, right away, everyone's like, no, they want the product, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you turn it into a ritual, right, this is where it connects with the brand. And if you help people slow down at the end of the day, and it's connected directly to the brand, and it becomes, this is my time of the day. This is 2 easy steps. I bring this together. I bring this together. What we've done is reinvent what has to be shipped. not just how it's shipped. So it varies a lot. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, it does. It must be great to have these opportunities where you can look really, really far out and push those things. So it's very, very cool. I had a quick peek at the Q&A while I was here, and there's a lot of questions going on about the Cliff Bar compostable wrappers. So I'm going to ask two people a question. I'm going to, Carolina, if you could just talk a little bit more about kind of two things that seem coming up. Number one is, how compostable are they? I think is one question I keep seeing. And the next is, what does this mean for systems in cities and so on, and the people who don't have municipal composting? Like, what are the thoughts around there? And then I believe How to Recycle put out a how to compost guide and best practices. So maybe Kelly, if you can maybe follow up with that.
Yeah, so the first question was to what degree? So we're aiming for industrial composting. So that means that we're gonna make sure that we have the BPI certification for industrial composting for our wrapper. And you know, we see that as really important, one, just because we have really high standards for our packaging, and in order to meet both those standards and make sure that we, you know, have this really kind of strong and you know, kind of packaging that is there to do what it needs to do, we have to make sure that we're both meeting those standards, but then also, of course, fully breaking down in compost processing facilities. So long answer, but yes, industrial composting and ensuring that we have the BPI certification. And then the second question is around infrastructure, which is a big challenge that we have top of mind at Cliff, right? We understand that that composting infrastructure isn't available broadly throughout the country, and it is very much a challenge, and it's something that we're trying to lean into because we feel like composting infrastructure is a really powerful solution for so many things. And creating a compostable wrapper allows us to kind of help support the growth of that infrastructure. You know, for us, it's kind of crazy to think that, to Scott's point, an apple core might end up in the landfill, right? Food waste needs to be diverted. It can't be, one, it shouldn't be wasted, but two, there are opportunities to recycle those nutrients. And so we're really, you know, we feel like there's huge promise. There's a really big growing movement around composting infrastructure tied to some of the climate regulations and laws that are coming into place. And so we're excited to see that movement. We think that it's going to keep picking up steam, and we're excited to be behind that as well.
So to add off of that, Charlie mentioned the How to Compost program. We do have a complimentary label for compostable packaging where items that are certified by BPI, like Carolyn is talking about, those can get the How to Compost label. So you have this side-by-side, recycle the box, compost the wrapper type of language. But I mentioned the Collaboration in Sustainable Packaging Coalition that led to How to Recycle be developed. A similar collaborative, they're actually called collaboratives, it's our engagement mechanism with members where companies come together around a certain subject matter area and talk about issues that are happening and potential solutions. And one of the collaboratives is just about compostable packaging. And so many questions in our community about, should I make this package compostable? Should I make this one compostable? What about shampoo packaging? What about candy wrappers? And there wasn't any guidance on when compostable packaging may be appropriate, because it's not appropriate in all circumstances. You should not be putting apparel in compostable bags, for example. But food service packaging is the best application for compostable packaging because you're using the packaging as a carrier of the food waste to the composter. The composter loves the food. So that guide that explores those issues was released this year, and it's available online at sustainablepackaging.org, but it's our Design for Compostable Packaging guide.
Great, thank you. So just one reminder, after this, I think we're going to go over to questions. So if you have questions you'd like to get asked, please type them in the Q&A. But this is called Perceptions of Sustainability. And you've all been working in the field for a while. Scott, you told us about, people see waste, they perceive it as waste immediately, even before it becomes waste. But I'm sure you've all had similar lessons about what you've learned about the way people perceive sustainability. So maybe start with Caroline. Like, how do people perceive sustainability of Cliff Bar and Company and the products you make?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we actually, this year we're celebrating our 20th anniversary of our sustainability program. So we've definitely been in this space for a number of years, and we're excited to kind of be moving on in this commitment around sustainable packaging and making these big moves. But and I'm sorry, Charlie, you're going to have to repeat the question. How do people at Cliff Bar?
So it's like, what have you, your customers? So Cliff, this is what I know. Tell me if I'm totally wrong here. Cliff Bar is like, employee-owned company. It's, very conscious where you source things from. You're like very green, to put it in general terms, right? So you're very green. But on the other hand, you've got a plastic wrapper. Yeah. So, which, is not recyclable at the moment. And yes, it's going to compost. So do people see, oh, you've got a plastic wrapper, this is a problem? Or is it like, oh, it's a plastic wrapper, but it's part of a bigger story? How do people see Cliff, I guess?
Yeah, no, and that's a good, I like that you're using the wrapper as the example there, because we get a lot of interest in our packaging, and we have gotten a lot of interest for many years around what's the solution that we're proposing for our plastic wrapper. But when it comes to sustainability at Cliff, we're working across so many different areas, and really, the impact of that plastic wrapper is actually very small, and that wrapper does a very big job in terms of the strength and the durability, the shelf life of the product. So yes, I'd say that when we're thinking about it, we have a really broad program that covers a lot of different topics, and sourcing really is probably the ingredient sourcing and how we look at our product in the packaging is probably where we have the biggest impact, and it's probably the foundation of our program and the work that we do around sustainability. And we try to talk a lot about the work that we're doing, all the way down to the farm level, and sharing that with our consumers. But like you said, packaging is a really tangible concern for people. After they've consumed a Cliff Bar, they have this wrapper still in hand. And so for us, we're seeing that as a really great opportunity, both as a brand, as a CPG, but then also as a company that has this legacy around sustainability to be able to lead in this space. And although we want to, kind of come out and be a leader in this space, we know that it takes everyone, and that we know that we're not perfect at this as well, and it's not going to happen overnight. But it's, I'd say that we're going big, and we're being very bold and ambitious, but we have this kind of guiding North Star around sustainability that we really, we're thinking long term, and we want to be really intentional around the decisions that we're making. Scott's talked a lot about plastic before, and the issues around plastic. We see that as well, right? And that's why we're kind of going even one step further to think through how can we find a more sustainable, more circular solution for our packaging. Yeah, ambitious for sure, but that's us at Cliff Bar.
Gotcha. So the wrapper is, like you say, a small part of the overall footprint, but it's a very easy thing to focus on.
Yeah, it's a great way to I think, we've got the real estate on the package to communicate with consumers, but also, like I said, it's super tangible, right? And I think that's where companies, CPGs like ours, are seeing that there's a great opportunity to engage with their consumers on that topic.
Cool. Scott, have you done any research in this area, understanding what people think is real, what is real, and how to help people?
Yeah, we jokingly call sustainability the S word, because you just don't know what you're going to get in terms of a response. If you just get that word out in front of a conversation, then that conversation can go sideways really fast. And so we, very much in tune to this idea that designers always have is it's not what it means to us. We know what we can do with sustainability. There's 1,000 things that we could do. What matters, what means something, is what matters to them, whoever the them is. So if it's consumers, or if it's the brand manager, or what have you, and to kind of shape the conversation first around where people want to be in 5 years, and then what the barriers are to getting there. enters us into a productive conversation about sustainability. And I think, so that's kind of overarching. And then, because we look at cognitive biases, we look at heuristics or rules of thumb, we look at behavior change, and we study all of that deeply. And from, people like BJ Fogg, who talks about motivation and ability and the trigger, you have to, and this is where earlier I'd said about, extended producer liability or what have you, is you need to have the ability. You can draw, the brand is a great way to create motivation, right? But you need a pathway. You need an understanding of how to do it. So if the brand can communicate what, something of the essence of the trust between the user and the company, as the behavior that they're asking for around the packaging, whether it be, composted or do this or do that, or there are a lot of different opportunities. That's where the real excitement comes into play, because there are a lot of different kinds of answers. So I mentioned BJ Fogg, but we look at kind of the elephant driver in the path. In other words, there needs to be you need to direct the rider. In other words, you need to give them some logic to work around, like the why, if you will. You need to motivate the elephant or get them emotionally excited and invested. And then you need the critical path. You need to be able to, and Kelly probably knows this better than anybody. Our recycling system is a mess. There's a lot of confusion. People get frustrated, they give up on it. One city's doing something, 5 years ago. Now they're doing something different now. So even 5 years in the same city, something changes, people just want to throw their hands up. So being very careful about providing a critical path. Step one, step two, make it easy. Allow the complexity of it to be more accessible. But once again, I see it as an exciting space.
Great, thank you.
There's not just one solution. There are many.
Cool. And Kelly, over to you. Thank you, Scott. I think behavior change as a subject is a big part of it. So thank you for addressing that. Kelly.
Yeah, absolutely. Love BJ Fogg, Scott. So one thing that I'm surprised by is how much focus packaging is getting right now in the public space. I have been with Green Blue for almost 6 years. I came from a background in public interest environmental law. So I was trained to sue polluters under the Clean Water Act type of a thing. I didn't know anything about packaging. And I couldn't believe how complex and interesting it was. And there are so many layers in thinking about how we manage and value materials as a society and how we consume things, and how packaging is connected to the sale of all products on Earth. And it's designed in a very specific way for a very specific purpose. Sometimes you need light barrier, water barrier, air barrier. You need to protect things from breaking. If your packaging fails on a TV and that TV breaks, the amount of energy and materials that went into the TV is so much more than the packaging that went into it. So that was a real eye-opener, how high-tech packaging really is. And I don't think that really anyone, just generally your average person, understands that. But the focus on ocean plastic pollution, I wrote a blog article about it in like 2015, and there were only a few articles on the whole internet that I could cite. It was crazy. And I thought, why doesn't everyone know about this? Why isn't everyone talking about this? And now everyone knows about it. And there's all these documentaries and mainstream media articles. And that makes me really, really happy as an environmentalist that people are paying attention to this and they care and they're demanding change. And that's fantastic. But honestly, what bothers me then is people's gut reaction to what is the best solution for this problem. And so there are two that stick out in my mind. One is this obsession with biodegradability, and the other is the fixation on plastics as a material and no other materials. So when it comes to biodegradability, I don't know where this came from in society, but I remember kind of picking up on it when I was a kid, that things are good if they go away and they disintegrate. But that shouldn't necessarily be our goal as a society, to have nature deal with it, and that if it only lasts a certain period of time in that form, then it's okay. And so what's really more meaningful is compostability. And that's why we're excited to hear what Cliff is doing, because compostable means that it will biodegrade in a specific time period, in a specific place, in a specific way that will then become something valuable, which is compost, which feeds soil health. And so there was a study by Keep America Beautiful some years ago that if something's labeled biodegradable, people might be more likely to litter it. So I get a little frustrated when I hear people say, well, why don't you make everything biodegradable? It's like, I don't think that's necessarily what we want. But then the other thing that I mentioned was the plastics. So we have a gigantic disaster on our hands with the plastic problem in the oceans, but the way that people, it just seems overly simplistic the way that people think about it. They think, I see the plastic, therefore it's bad. It's not going away, or it's not dissipating in the environment, therefore it's bad. So they're pushing for these material shifts when now paper packaging is getting jacked up with all these ingredients so that it has the performance of plastic packaging. And no, people are thinking critically about other materials, like glass is really energy intensive to make and to recycle, just as an example. So there's all these trade-offs with packaging, and it depends on the packaging product system and where it's sold and how it's used. That all fits together, and that means that every package design should be thought about in a really careful way. And so some things should not be in plastic, but some things maybe should be, but it all depends on that package product system. So that's something that I think about. And then the last thing I'll quickly mention is I'm surprised at how the brands in how to recycle are surprised at the value of our not recyclable label. So one of our labels, we tell people to put the item in the trash, don't recycle it, because it's important to prevent it against contamination, because you can't just put everything in the recycling bin. And a lot of companies are really reluctant, not a lot, some of them are reluctant. Well, we don't want to admit it's not recyclable. Oh, we only want to talk about the good stuff. We're a positive brand. But we have a consumer survey, and it shows that 76% of people that see the label have a more positive impression of a company. And a decent portion of them say it's specifically because they're saying that their stuff is not recyclable. So to me, as a millennial, I guess, I'm not surprised people love transparency. It's empowering to know to put it in the trash, but a lot of our members have been surprised by that. But many of our members do embrace that label, like Walmart, for example, is using it on all their stuff that's not recyclable. So it's really great to see companies embracing that transparency first, and then they work to make the improvements alongside that.
That's great to hear.
I'm sorry. I feel like, Kelly, you're speaking our language. That's exactly what Cliff Bar is thinking. And you're right. There needs to be transparency. You need to be understanding the challenges, and also, like, brands like ours and other CPGs need to do what we can to be as consistent and clear with that messaging. But it's complicated. It's really very complicated. But you're right. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I want to hand over to Catherine, because I realize that the conversations, I don't know, I hope we've got enough time for some questions, but over to you.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. So yeah, we had a ton of questions, a very inquisitive audience today. But I guess the first question I'll ask will be directed to Scott, and also maybe Kelly, if you have anything to add on after, around plastics, and specifically the number system associated with the different materials of plastics. I know for me, who feels like I'm somewhat well informed in this area, is still really confused about that whole system. So how, in your opinion, can we make that a little bit more meaningful for consumers? And the question specifically is there any kind of additional education that you think manufacturers can use or implement on their packaging to help kind of remedy some of that confusion?
Right, that's an old question, isn't it? Because it is a problematic system, and I think there are a lot of issues with it. The studies show, and you guys have been touching on this, that if there's any level of uncertainty as to whether or not it's the right thing to do, people will just not do it. Right. So that, Kelly, like what you're saying in terms of, oh, it's not recyclable. that builds confidence. So they know that they should, rather than sitting there going like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So, you know, a lot of cities have been very successful in, you know, 1, 2, you know, so like those are the only 2 that you can recycle, a 1 and a 2. You know, some come up with a mnemonic device that helps people understand what could be recycled and what can't be recycled in that community. The single stream thing is it can be really, really messy because we have this in Savannah. I hear from a lot of people who say, well, did you know that they're not recycling everything that I put in the container? And the city of Savannah does a very good job. They said, we will only recycle 1s and 2s underneath. They just say, give us everything and we'll do the sorting. So I think there has to be, and one of the biggest issues, this is just an opinion, you turn over a bottle and is it a 2 or is it a 5? You know, glasses are new to me. So I need glasses to look, but even with my glasses on, you don't know if it's a 2 or a 5. So we can recycle 2s here, but we can't recycle 5s. If you know plastics, you're going to know the difference, but the consumers are not going to know the difference. I don't know if that's addressing the question directly, but I think it's a matter of being more purposeful, like with how to recycle. You know, like clarity around the issue. Keep it as simple and direct as possible.
Yeah, the How to Recycle label was designed to be the first line of communication to consumers about whether an item is recyclable, because those numbers were actually never intended to communicate recyclability. They were invented in the 80s by recyclers and plastic industry people to create consistency with all the different plastics that people were starting to use in manufacturing, but also to just give recyclers some information behind the scenes. And because there wasn't a system like How to Recycle until the last few years, those ended up becoming the only way that communities could really easily talk about what was accepted for recycling in those places. But they really don't carry that much meaning at all. I mean, sometimes they can help you know if you need to check locally for certain packaging types, but 3s and 7s are not recyclable. If you see a 3 or a 7 on any package and that brand is also telling you it's recyclable, they're lying to you. Because 3s, it's PVC, it's really detrimental to the recycling system. And 7 is a catch-all category. It could mean that it's compostable, which is great, or it could mean it's acrylic or multi-material. So it really doesn't carry any meaning. And even still, the number doesn't take into consideration design aspects like closures, labels, things that it can impact the recyclability of a package. You could put a label on a package and make it not recyclable because the near infrared sortation equipment in the recycling facilities can't read the bottle underneath it. And so it really doesn't tell the whole story at all. And the other thing is, even when communities do say we accept plastics 1 and 2, that doesn't always speak to the format. So plastic 1 is PET, and most beverage bottles are PET. It's one of the most widely recyclable formats in North America. But if it's a tray made out of PET, which packaging engineers would call a thermoform, then that's only recyclable in certain regions of the country. So what companies can do is leverage the How to Recycle label to take away that guesswork for the consumer.
Good. And just to quickly build on that, the 7, as Kelly's saying, is basically everything else. And everything else, our technologies have created so many plastics outside the 1 through 6 that 7 could be divided almost infinitely. And so it's really not very helpful. There are a number of plastics in that 7 category that could be effectively recycled because of the quantities that we're now making that we weren't making even 5 years ago. So I think we have to, and this is an old conversation. I think we just have to reinvent that. Old habits die hard, though.
Great. Yeah, so the next question is for Carolina. You mentioned earlier the idea of advocacy. So one of our listeners was really interested to hear a little bit more about how kind of advocacy and engagement with policymakers and regulators at the local, state, national level, what you can kind of do to kind of raise the bar for the entire market to kind of level the playing field, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think, well, let me first just say that for Cliff Bar, advocacy is kind of a large part of how we work specifically around advocating and supporting what we value as a company. So we have our VP of Government Affairs and a number of individuals across the company that do advocacy work, and we do it across a number of topics, including public lands and climate, of course, organic and sustainable farming. And for packaging, I think it's, this is a bit of a new area for us. And we're definitely looking and hoping for legislation that can support what we're talking about here as a group, right? That's consistent and that's at the federal level. We know that there's a lot happening at the state level and the local level. And I think that's one of the big challenges is right now is that, manufacturers are creating products for the country as a whole, right? And it is really challenging when you have different labeling systems, different requirements, different ways that locales are handling waste or materials. And so I think that's for us, when we think about what we're hoping for in the future is more federal legislation that enables consistency and that supports really effective policies at a broader level. Of course, when it comes to infrastructure and other challenges, there are going to be probably faster moving efforts going on at the state and the local level. But of course, that's got to be across all three. And we're definitely keeping our eye on all of them and excited about some of the bills that are being proposed and some of the, kind of the work around EPR, like Scott and I have been talking about, that I think that there's a lot of potential and a lot of big movement happening right now that we want to be a part of that conversation. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, thank you. Something interesting that came up, actually, Kelly, you mentioned kind of the unintended consequences of compostable packaging. A lot of people see that and think they can litter it or throw it on the ground and it'll just turn into dirt. But we had someone also ask if there's any unintentional consequences of kind of recyclable packaging, like people might feel better about purchasing plastic because then they know they can recycle it at the end, and it kind of helps alleviate some of that guilt. So any thoughts from any of you on that idea?
Well, no company should be putting marketing language out there into the world, making people think that just because an item is recyclable, that they have no consumption guilt. That's not good. So the approach that we take at how to recycle is we're pragmatic. Packaging, like I said, it touches all products. We need to dispose of it when we're done with it. There are recycling systems available for it. So we want to empower people to know how to do that correctly. But I agree, it is definitely a concern. And I think a lot of it comes down to how the brand messages recyclability outside of their use of the label. Like, how are they talking about recycling? Are they, you maybe can tell if they're more genuine on whether or not they have goals to make their packaging more recyclable, whether they're hitting their goals. And there are other indicators that indicate the seriousness, but it is something that is very concerning for sure.
Great. So I think we have kind of about time for one last question. And I think this is kind of a nice wrap-up question, but one of our listeners asked how consumers can be part of changing the system. And I know we had a discussion about this kind of the last time we talked. So maybe if each of you could talk a little bit about what advice you would give to brands or consumers in order to kind of make a difference. So people who really, want to make a change, but might not know how yet. Carolina, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. I think I'll say two things. We've talked a lot about advocacy from a company perspective, but I think that consumers have a really big opportunity to vote with their dollars and the purchases that they make. And I think that as a part of that, consumers need to be a little bit more, just more aware, right? I think, we tend to put a lot of onus on the consumer themselves, right? You need to figure out how to properly dispose of this package, recycle it. You figure this out. But I think what I would do is encourage people just to be a little bit more thoughtful about their purchasing habits and supporting companies that they know are making changes, and really working towards that authentically and the commitments that they've made. I think too that like I said earlier, you know, packaging is really tangible. It's a tangible issue that people face. You know, you deal with packaging day in and day out, but and we usually just tend to think about it as like, does it have an end of life solution? Does it have somewhere it can go that I can feel okay about, you know, it's not going in the landfill? But there's so much more, like what Kelly was saying. It's so complex, right? It's the materials that go in your packaging. There's so much more to it that I think that consumers can just be a little bit more aware of that and making intentional choices around their purchasing habits.
Yeah, Scott, what about you? Any advice for brands or consumers who want to make a difference?
Yeah, I think Ray Anderson at Interface said like a decade and a half ago, he said, "One day people like me will be seen as plunderers of the earth." And, you know, I think one of the things we have to think about is, you know, you put it any time in the future you want, 20 years, 30, 40 years. And I think a lot of people will shake my old bones and go, "You did what?" You know, like when we tell them that we just threw stuff out, that there wasn't a system where the value of the material, whatever that material might be, could be reintegrated into production. And so, you know, with that in mind, and I think we always have to look at, okay, we're a species that have done wonderful things, but we're not done yet. Right. So, and I know that's just a little like intro to kind of my thinking here. I agree totally with Carolina. I think there's an opportunity here for people and we're seeing it. We see a lot of studies around belief-driven consumption, purpose-driven consumption, and all of that. Is be more purposeful of what you're purchasing and what you are stewarding and by way of materials, and be more active. I love Patagonia. I love what they do when it comes to advocacy. I really love what Cliff Bar is doing. I think seventh generation, they're taking the brand essence and they're infusing it with authenticity, right? If you look at brand language, it's about like, oh, you know, we love the planet, we do this, so we care about our neighbors. There's all this great language in brand language, but how far does that go? Right? Does it really permeate anything beyond the, okay, now that we got your money, we're good? You know, not to be too cynical, but what does that mean when it comes to stewarding different kinds of materials? How does a brand essence translate into more mindfulness about the materiality that we're exposed to, and the stewardship that we can easily provide as long as we have groups like SPC, and as long as Carolina said, we can build sensible policies about creating reverse logistics, about bringing materials back in. And I know I said it earlier, but this is a massive business opportunity. Right? So it's not just the right thing to do, but there's real opportunity here. Just review, be more mindful and live your beliefs. We go out and, you know, we talk to our neighbors like, I believe this, I believe that, right? I mean, you got plenty to say, people, right? How about you mindful in terms of how you live it?
Before I speak to that, I wanted to briefly touch on the last question. It's such a good one about consumption and recycling. I just wanted to briefly say that the How to Recycle label, I mean, it is an environmental marketing claim, but it does create an incentive for companies to change because they want to tell their consumers that it's recycled packaging. So we made a decision recently to say that certain plastics not as recyclable, and it had the direct result of several $1 million of investment in the recycling system. So there is a value there to improving the systems by having that recycling label. And it seems like regulation is going to come in the US this year to get to some of the root causes of some of those problems. But what I would say for brands and retailers who want to embrace sustainability is to join the How to Recycle program and add the label to your packaging to empower people to know exactly what to do. Create sustainable packaging goals if you don't have them already. SPC, we have a goals database so you can see what good goals look like, what your peers are doing, and consider joining Sustainable Packaging Coalition to find that community of practice with your peers. And then what I would say for consumers is it really is important to get to know your local recycling program. In the US, it's all disjointed because of the history of waste management in our country and the lack of federal governmental guidance. And so it really does differ place to place, as everyone knows. And so by getting to know your program, then you will be less likely to contribute to contamination, which hurts the economics of recycling. And don't wish cycle. Don't assume that elves will take care of every little piece of everything that you own. So when in doubt, just leave it out.
Great, thank you. I love that expression, wish cycle. I've never heard that before. Great, I'll hand it back to Charlie to wrap it up.
Great, thanks very much, everyone. Thank you all for your time. It's been a great conversation. If anyone wants to revisit this conversation, it's going to be posted on our website in a couple of days, along with a recap. And let me do a quick screen share so I can tell you about the next salon. So this is our next Smart Salon. We're taking a break from sustainability, and we'll get back to that the next month, but the month after rather. So next month we're welcoming former Smarty Carla Diana back. She's the author of a new book, My Robot Gets Me, and she's going to be talking about how social design can make new products more human. That will be Tuesday, April 13th at 5 p.m. There's a link popping up in the chat now. go.smartdesignworldwide.com/robot. Click there and sign up. Thank you very, very much once again, Kelly, Carolina, and Scott, for a really great discussion tonight. Thanks everybody who listened, and thank you for your questions, and hope to see you all again soon. Have a great night.
Thank you.